instead of freedom, it was bondage. Instead of the new covenant, it was still in the old covenant. The contrast is that you see is that they were adding to Christ instead of just it being Christ alone. And it's interesting as well, because we have kind of two audiences that Paul is speaking to. He's speaking to the church of Galatia, but he's also mentioning these false apostles, and he calls them accursed, which is, I mean, it's basically to say you of curse. He's basically cursing them. So I think that there's two ways you could interpret this, and I'll dive into that more later. But you can interpret it in light of the church of Christ and those who are attempting to tear it down or add to it or change it. So that's kind of what sums up the letter of Galatians. And I think I'm just going to go through the verse again, and it says, he starts with, I'm astonished, which is a very bold, I think, word to say. Like, he's saying, like, he's astonished. He's amazed of what just happened, as so to speak, as though, I'll read what John Calvin said, or I'll paraphrase, is that they so quickly were led away to a different gospel, as to say that as soon as Paul left, they completely deserted him. And he is astonished by it. There is a tone of like urgency, kind of frustration. He's just taken aback by what is going on within the church. He says, you so quickly desert the one who called you, the grace of Christ, and turn to a different gospel. Not that there is another one, but that there are some who trouble you and want to distort the gospel of Christ. So there were people that were attempting to distort the gospel of Christ, and that's what I meant by this kind of combination of audience, is those who are distorting the gospel of Christ need to be addressed, and Paul is addressing both of them. He's upset that the Galatians have deserted the gospel, but he's also really upset that these people were causing the desertion. And I'll continue to read in verse 8. Even if we or an angel from heaven should preach you a gospel contrary to the one we preach you, let him be accursed. And I'm going to read a quote from John MacArthur. It says, Satan's primary target for false teaching is the doctrine of salvation, because if people are confused about what they have no way of coming to God in the first place, thus remains under Satan's influence and control. So I completely agree with what MacArthur is saying, in that these false apostles, these false doctrines that are being indoctrinated into the church of Galatia, and it still happens today, is the way Satan is trying to destroy the doctrine of salvation, or the doctrine of the gospel of Christ. And that is the anthem of this book, and that's why Paul is getting straight to the point, in that he knows and he's astonished and knows how horrible it is of what is happening. And he also has to defend his